It took 5 seconds to alter everything. A moment, a gesture, one hand outstretched across a conference table in respectful silence, and one reaction that showed more than everyone anticipated. What came next? No one in this building saw it coming, and the man that they attempted to brush aside, he would go on to move billions quietly, not merely in dollars, but in potential, in employment, in lives. This tale isn't about screaming, you see. It isn't about vengeance or settling scores. It's about something so much stronger. What occurs when someone with vision, values, and unassuming fortitude enters a room and is perceived as less and then does that much more. Raymond Thomas had spent a lifetime building, not businesses, but bridges. At 55, he wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. He wasn't seeking status. He had already gained the trust of hundreds of small business leaders, community leaders, and investors who knew his name, not because he insisted they did, but because he delivered. He was there. He listened. He made things happen. So when he appeared at the office of one of the nation's most influential private equity firms, Hollinger Capital, he didn't come to beg favors. He came to present a unique chance, a partnership to deliver sustainable growth to underserved Americans in communities all over the nation. He was there prepared, intent, and respectful. He came to meet the firm's billionaire founder, Douglas Wexler, a man efficient but also proud. Raymond held out his hand, a dignified international greeting between professionals. But Wexler stopped, flashed a brief smirk, and uttered, "I don't shake hands with staff." That 7-word sentence dangled in the air like ice. For an instant, nobody shifted. Nobody said a word. But in that silence, a silent transformation occurred. Raymond didn't protest. He didn't clarify who he was. He just smiled, nodded, and sat down. What Wexler couldn't grasp then was that Raymond wasn't staff. He was the fellow behind a $4 billion economic fund, funded by a national network of Black-owned banks, regional investors, grassroots entrepreneurs, and civic institutions. He was the founder, the one who made the decision, the one who built. And by dismissing him in that instant, Wexler didn't merely offend a guest, he left behind a future he couldn't yet imagine. And now here's the good part. Because what Raymond did afterward wasn't boisterous, it wasn't flashy, it was consistent, it was intelligent, and it was driven by purpose. He excused himself from the meeting with dignity and flew back home. That evening, he sat down with his inner circle. No gripe, no unnecessary time squandered, only strategy. The very next day, he recounted the tale at a private breakfast with other financiers, individuals who did have ears to listen. He instructed them not to pity him, but to listen. "We entered a room with open hands," he said quietly, "and we exited with open eyes." That sentence, it rattled the room, and it ignited a flame. In a matter of days, meetings became commitments. Those commitments became investments. The tale spread, not by rumor, but by respect. And the message was this: if the gates won't open up, we create our own. And Raymond did exactly that. In fewer than 30 days, he had attracted more than $4.1 billion in committed capital, not by splashy headlines, but by steadfast belief. Over 700 small businesses got their initial doses of funding. Employment rose through the roof. From Detroit to Atlanta, new hope was budding. And in the meantime, Wexler started noticing Raymond's name everywhere, on front pages, in editorials, shaking hands with governors, CEOs, even a former U.S. president. 2 months later, after that initial meeting, Wexler's assistant called, then his senior partner, then Wexler himself. He requested another meeting. This time, Raymond did not travel. He provided a 15-minute video conference. During that conference, Wexler moderated his tone. "Raymond, I believe we started off on the wrong foot," he said. "Let's revisit that possibility." But Raymond did not fall into the trap. He reclined, still respectful, still calm, and responded, "You assumed I was just staff. That was not the issue. It was the way you made me, and others like me, feel invisible." And then he delivered the line that resonates through boardrooms to this day. "We're already building the future, with or without you." That call concluded without ceremony. Raymond thanked him, closed the laptop, and returned to work. And as the months passed, his movement only strengthened. Schools, stores, tech centers, clean power projects, all supported by the fund he co-led, each of them based on community, not ego. The refused handshake, it became a symbol, not one of bitterness, but of power with humility. A reminder that leadership isn't always accompanied by trumpets. Sometimes, it enters a room with a quiet confidence and leaves with a legacy that speaks more loudly than words ever could. And that, in a nutshell, is what this tale is actually about. Not some businessman or a billionaire, but about how we treat people, about how we identify value, not through suits or titles, but through vision, integrity, and how they behave when nobody is looking. So if you ever felt discounted, if you ever felt misjudged or talked down to, keep in mind, this you don't have to break in. You can construct so deeply, so solidly, that the world pays attention, not because you screamed the loudest, but because you lifted up others. It began with a hand, a humble, respectful one, timeless, universal, the kind of hand that affirms, "Oh, we're equals here," regardless of what you do or what you wear. But what happened next? No one in that room was expecting. Oh! Raymond Thomas had traveled from the other side of the country for this meeting. He wasn't a stranger to pressure. At 55, silver only just beginning to crown his temples, and a stillness that decades doing business could alone produce, he had evolved into an unobtrusive power in the realm of economic development. Clean-cut, quick intelligence, his navy blue suit immaculately pressed, shoes polished, and portfolio in hand. He walked as a man who knew his destination, even if others didn't always recognize it. Raymond had spent his career lifting up communities, bringing together small business leaders, community banks, and local leaders into forceful partnerships. And this Manhattan excursion, not just another transaction, a chance, a big possible investment that could help drive jobs and capital into neighborhoods that had been neglected for years. The building he entered that day was glass, steel, and quiet. Ooh, the sort of environment in which money did not whisper, it roared. He had been asked to the 51st floor of Hollinger Capital, one of the nation's most powerful private equity houses, headed by none other than billionaire Douglas Wexler. Wexler was a legend of Wall Street, efficiently ruthless, notoriously direct, and unashamedly proud of what he had amassed. His name was worth its weight in gold, and so were his views. Raymond stepped into the sharp conference room, where a long single table ran like a runway, under clean light fixtures. He glanced over his notes one final time. It had all been laid out. Numbers, estimates, impact predictions. Nothing was left to guesswork. Then the door swung open. In strode Wexler, tall, lean, eyes as sharp as knives. He didn't smile, didn't hesitate. Ooh! Just walked straight to the head of the table. In a gesture of deference, Raymond rose, held out his hand, and gave a firm but cordial greeting. Ooh! Mr. Wexler, thanks for seeing you. I'm glad to have the chance to. But Wexler did not take the hand. He did not even look at him. Ooh! He held the pause just long enough to look down at Raymond's offered hand and say, with a coffee icing glint of dry amusement, "I don't shake hands with staff." That instant, it didn't merely shift the temperature in the room, it altered the trajectory of all that came next. For an instant, the air was heavy, not with rage, not even with offense, but with something more intimate. Ah! A muted pivot. Ah! Recognition. Raymond didn't bat an eye. He just nodded, retracted his hand, and seated himself with dignity. But in that moment, it became apparent that Wexler had miscalculated. Ooh! Not with the proposal, but with the man across from him. What Wexler had assumed was staff was actually the founder and managing director of the very coalition he'd been asked to address. Raymond wasn't only involved in the initiative, he was the initiative. He was the creator of a $4 billion fund, supported by a formidable coalition of Black-owned banks, regional credit unions, civic foundations, and community investors, individuals who had faith, not just in returns, but in rebuilding. And whereas Wexler noticed a suitably dressed aide with a folder, what he didn't notice was a man who carried more than numbers of dollars. He carried the dreams of hundreds of small business owners in the South, many of whom had never been given a seat at tables such as this. That slight, it wasn't just about him, it was about history. But Raymond kept his cool, as he always did. He didn't explain himself. He did not rebuke Wexler. Rather, he began his presentation,
was audible and composed and painted a vision that might have revolutionized the way capital was invested in underserved communities across the country. He described actual individuals such as the woman who owns a third-generation family bakery in Birmingham, the father-son welding business in Augusta, and the young programmer who teaches children in mobile to create apps. These weren't numbers on a sheet of paper, they were American tales in need of gas. But Wexler hardly glanced up. He took a sip of his imported coffee, glanced at his watch twice, and when Raymond finished, he had only a brusque, "Not interested. Good luck with your project." Raymond smiled graciously, closed his folder, and thanked him for his time. As he departed from that skyscraper, one would have assumed he'd bombed. But those who knew Raymond, they knew better. Because some hands build quietly, some hands carry generations, and sometimes, the hand that's refused ends up shaking the very foundation of power. That same evening, as Raymond Thomas rode his home flight to Atlanta, the city lights receding in the clouds, he didn't bear disappointment in his breast, he bore clarity. Wexler's rejection hadn't hurt him. It had just reaffirmed something he already understood, that respect is not necessarily rendered in seats of power, but won in rooms where individuals still listen with their hearts. Raymond opened his binder, swept past the Hollinger bid, and started drafting new bullet points for his future meetings. For what most didn't realize was that Wexler's company wasn't the only name on the list, not even close. Raymond had courted regional investors, community-focused philanthropists, Black-owned financial institutions, and civic innovation funds over the past several months. Some doubted him, wondering if his venture would scale. Others were hopeful but with caution. But they shared one thing in common: they were open to hearing him out. The next morning, he was sitting at a closed round table in Atlanta, surrounded by 9 key partners, men and women he'd worked with over the years, each of them with his own special influence over various corners of the economic landscape. He explained to them the story, not with resentment, not to embarrass Wexler, but to illuminate how perception continues to distort opportunity. We entered a room with open hands. Raymond spoke softly, his voice even but heavy. We exited with open eyes. That one sentence, it didn't have to be screamed. It resonated. The room fell silent, and then came nods, whispers, assent. What Raymond knew, and what the others now knew, was that this wasn't about one offended businessman. It was about thousands of doors that had been shut for decades. It was about the unspoken assumptions that still lingered in elite spaces. And more significantly, it was about the new doors they could open together. That week things happened more quickly than anyone could have anticipated. Word traveled, quietly, strategically. Raymond also met with heads of credit unions, powerful pastors, tech incubators, and city council members. 12 serious investors approached him within 5 days, some committing capital, some committing resources, mentorship, infrastructure. None of them signed up because of pity. They recognized the long-term potential. They recognized the groundwork that Raymond had done, not the numbers on spreadsheets, but the stories of actual lives. One investor called it the most grounded, human-centered proposal I've seen in 20. Over the next month, that seed Raymond had planted, it didn't just sprout, it bloomed. Fast, a partnership was formed between regional banks in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Birmingham to create a revolving microloan platform. A major logistics company agreed to subsidize supply chains for small manufacturers. Tech investors launched a development hub for minority-owned startups. The press noticed, but Raymond did not pursue interviews. He just continued to work, because for him it was never a matter of being noticed. It was about noticing others succeed. In 30 days, the coalition raised more than $4.1 billion in pledged money, cash that wasn't promised, but already in motion. Over 700 small businesses in the South and Midwest received the initial round of capital.
A long-shuttered textile mill in Selma reopened, employing 160 people. A group of Black farmers in Mississippi received grants to expand sustainable agriculture. In Detroit, a mother-daughter duo launched a beauty brand that sold out its first production run within a week. And the impact didn't stop there. because every job created rippled out into families, neighborhoods, schools, and future. Within less than 2 months, more than 90,000 jobs had been funded across the country, with further projections indicating even more on the cards. Something that began as a mere handshake that never materialized had turned into a quiet revolution, founded not on press release, but on trust. Raymond never complained about it. He didn't take to social media, didn't react to company rumor or the silent rumors about what went down at Hollister. Instead, he stayed on mission, anchored in the same principles that had carried him to that glass skyscraper in the first place. Because he knew sometimes the biggest changes don't arrive in boom, they arrive in waves. And those waves, they were now rolling around the nation, picking up communities one worker, one owner, one family at a time. The strength of that moment, the moment when one room would not look at him and another would listen to him, became the foundation of something much greater than money. It became a movement. And the wonderful irony, the same guy who had once been pushed aside as just staff was now the head of one of the most influential business coalitions in the country. Not because he battled to be recognized, but because he led with integrity. Ultimately, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing Wexler he was wrong. It was about demonstrating that when the right individuals gather with the right purpose, no door can remain locked permanent. Almost 2 months had gone by since that frozen handshake never took place, since Raymond Thomas exited that Manhattan high-rise and re-entered the Pulse of South, with not only a proposal but a movement. During that period, the headlines started to emerge. Business pages started publishing profiles of an overnight economic tsunami sweeping across the Southeast. Local television stations reported on barbershops turned French, on former warehouses buzzing with activity once, on children with laptops learning to program in after-school classes paid for by the very project Wexler had designed. And before long, those tales were making their way into type of boardrooms Wexler admired. Forbes, Bloomberg, even a Sunday section of the New York Times reported on the eye-popping growth of Raymond Community Fund, over $4 billion in aid, over 90,000 jobs created, and a coalition investors once too distant to ever coalesce. The pictures started circulating too. There was Raymond, shaking hands with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, smiling alongside state governors, speaking at a leadership summit alongside a former U.S. president. And while he wasn't one to chase cameras, the cameras had found him anyway. Then on a quiet Thursday morning, Raymond's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was Wexler's assistant, polite, slightly awkward, asking if Wexler might be able to reconnect, discuss potential alignment. Raymond thanked and declined. A week after that, the senior partner at Hollinger Capital called with a longer email full of flattery, questions, and a keen discussing to add value. Again, Raymond replied appreciative, but not on the hook. Then just a few days later, Wexler himself phoned. No assistant, no intermediary, just straight from the horse's mouth. Raymond let it go to voice. Later that afternoon, after checking his calendar and wondering if it was worth the trip back, he consented to a 15-minute video conference. No plane, no Manhattan skyscraper, just eyes to eyes on a screen, on Raymond's terms. When the time came, Wexler also sported a friendlier visage. He grinned with a sense of familiarity, as if attempting to wipe out what was already inscribed in memory. Raymond, he started, voice suave, near scripted. He believed we might have got off on the wrong foot. I've been tracking phenomenal success, and I'd love to revisit that we had to talk about. Obviously, you're doing something right. Let's find out how Hollinger can be a part of it. Holst. Raymond did not flinch. He did not lean forward. He simply sat back in his chair, serene, unruffled, and elegant as ever. His voice wasn't icy, but it was firm. The sort of firm that happens when you don't require the validation of people who previously diminished. Mr. Wexler, he began, tone warm but concise. You assumed I was staff, and that wasn't actually the problem. The problem was how you made me, and others like me, feel invisible. That moment said it all. And I'd lie if I said it didn't ring in every conversation that followed. Wexler's face barely moved, but his eyes did. They blinked, then drooped, just for a second. We weren't looking for validation, Raymond continued. We were looking for partnership, and when that wasn't provided, we constructed without it. The resulting silence wasn't hollow, it was dense, burdened. Wexler's throat cleared, maybe in search of another perspective, but Raymond was already concluding. We're already constructing the future, with or without you. But thanks for the call. And with that, Raymond closed the meeting, graciously, firmly, and with all the dignity that had served him for decades, navigating rooms in which he was usually the sole person who appeared to look like. He sat there for a moment afterward, not triumphantly, but thoughtfully, because for Raymond, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about displaying Wex. It was about ensuring that doors no longer open based on impression alone. It was about demonstrating to the next generation that you don't have to contort yourself as someone else's shape to be respected. Sometimes, dignity is the most abiding power of all. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, his father's barber shop, the place where he learned how to listen, how to plan, how to lead. Then he turned back to his laptop, where 3 new proposals from local partners were waiting. The work wasn't done, but now, it was being accomplished on his terms, at his time, and with the type of friends who understood how to shake hands and mean it.
Oh,
Raymond never boasted, not ever. He didn't appear on news programs or talk shows to tell stories about how it all went down. He didn't tweet about the call or when he turned down Hollinger's offer. Actually, unless you were present in the room, you may never have been aware it occurred at all. There was no mic drop, no instant videos, no sensationalized headlines, just quiet dignity and laser-like determination. News traveled anyway, like ripples in quiet water. Not boisterous, but consistent. Investors discussed it.
entrepreneurs spoke of it.
Leaders in the community started referring to the Raymond model as a case study in vision, elegance, and execution. The message spread, not because he yelled it, but because others felt it. Because when something is crafted with great purpose, people can feel it. Now the fund Raymond helped create is no longer an experiment. It's a living force in hundreds of communities. You can see it in the bustling storefronts where the lights used to be off, in the Memphis printing shop that bought 2 new presses and hired twice the employees, in the Tulsa food truck park where young cooks experiment with their first business endeavor with mentorship and microloans, in the lines of houses being rebuilt by Black-owned contracting firms that now at last are able to get capital. Business proprietors who were given no for years, too little, too recent, too risky, now say yes to expansion, employing neighbors and educating apprentices. What was once an unseen wall of denial is now a pipe of potential, and perhaps most powerful of all, how it is affecting the next generation. Youths who came of age with tales of shortage now have examples of growth. Children once corralled into a single path, perhaps mere survival, are now taking multiple entrepreneurship, trades, technology, art, medicine. One young woman in Birmingham, brought up by her grandmother and buoyed by a Raymond-sponsored scholarship, is now working at NASA as an intern. Another young man, previously working midnight shifts to support his family, recently started a sneaker restoration company and employed 3 of his high school acquaintances. These aren't one-off victories. They're cumulative, and they all lead back somehow to the quiet revolution Raymond created. And yet, amidst it all, he remains in the background. He meets with businesses without a camera crew following him. He coaches new leaders in secret. He enters rooms where his name is familiar, but his ego remains outside. And the most poetic of it all, that handshake, the one Wexler declined, it evolved into something greater than either of them. It evolved into a subtle symbol, handed from one to the next, not of payback or bitterness, but of power tempered with humility. It reminded people that respect doesn't emerge from titles or views of skyscrapers. It is derived from the manner in which you treat the individual who is in front of you. That one moment, suspended in time, is now a sort of moral compass for many professionals and leaders alike. Not that it was dramatic, but that it was controlled. Because Raymond did not yell, he just constructed. He constructed purpose, with people, with legacy in mind. And as more investors and changemakers look at how they interact with underserved populations, his model stands tall, never once asking for a round of applause. Because sometimes the biggest response isn't outrage, isn't conflict, it's progress. Real, unrelenting, values-based progress. The kind that endures beyond the news cycle. The kind that transforms lives over months, not minutes. The kind of progress that speaks volumes. And perhaps that's the true legacy Raymond is leaving, not the jobs or the buildings or the capital, but the subtle change in the way leaders
in the way opportunity is present, in the way potential is viewed. His path reminds us that you do not always have to force your way through a door that will not open. Sometimes you create your own and open it to others as well. So what does a handshake actually signify? Is it merely tradition, muscle memory carried forward through generations, or is it something else? A modest but significant gesture of respect to one another, acknowledgement that we both exist, we both count, and for the sake of this instant we are standing on equal footing. Perhaps it's merely 5 fingers crossing paths in the air between two individuals, or perhaps a tacit understanding that whispers, "I see you." In politics, business, even life, those small acts of communication mean something, particularly for those whose entire existence has been one of being ignored. For Raymond Thomas, that one refused handshake didn't derail his quest, it defined it.
All was set as into it, Shigor. It created a distinction between titles and values, between being observed and being assessed. He did not require Wexler's approval. He was not there to impress. He arrived with a vision, a plan, and most of all, a movement behind him. Families, workers, dreamers, and doers who had waited long enough for someone to believe in them. And when one door slammed shut, not with words but with a derisive sneer, Raymond didn't knock again. He constructed his own doorway and brought thousands along. That's the difference between ego and legacy. Wexler might have owned buildings, portfolios, and headlines, but Raymond owned trust. He moved forcefully but unobtrusively, grounded in purpose. And though Wexler's money might purchase access, visibility, even influence, it could not purchase the one thing that truly mattered in the end: the profound, abiding respect of those who witnessed what was possible because of one man's dedication to them, not over them, not to the side of them, but alongside them. And today, as the fund Raymond assisted in building grows, as small businesses flourish and youth blaze new trails, the legacy he leaves is not etched on marble or defined by stock table. It's lived in the lives of those who were told no and now live in yes, in the communities once overlooked, now flourishing, and in the quiet revolution ignited not by yelling, but by action. So perhaps a handshake is more than a gesture. Perhaps it's a mirror, reflecting what we decide to see in the person in front of us. Do we see a title, a color, a status, or do we see another human being deserving of dignity? Raymond saw people, and by doing so made them able to see themselves. And Wexler, well, he can still have his towers and his wealth, but Raymond holds something that endures beyond it all, something no one can steal or quantify, a legacy that makes the world shake with a gentle, firm touch.